John focuses his resurrection story on Mary Magdalene, also Peter, and this unnamed disciple, which we believe was John himself. But I want to focus on Mary this morning. I also want to focus on how much she is like us. So who was this Mary Magdalene? No, Magdalene was not her last name. It was a designation that meant a woman of Magdala. Magdala was a port city on the Mediterranean. It was famous for a lot of trade. Goods went in and out. Now, we don't know if she was from Magdala, but we do know that she had a great ministry after the resurrection of Christ in Magdala. So what do we know about this Mary Magdalene? We do know that in chapter 11, there was a woman named Mary whose brother Lazarus was raised. Perhaps this was the same Mary, this Mary from Bethany. If she had experienced her brother being raised from the dead, that certainly would have changed her life, and she may have dedicated her life to serving Jesus and decided the best place to do that was in Magdala. We do know that she might have been the one who in chapter 12 prepared him for burial by putting perfume on his head. We know that she saw the triumphant entry on Palm Sunday, and we know that she watched him be crucified because John tells us in chapter 19 that she was there with Jesus' mother and John. Well, we do know that she waited over the Sabbath to prepare Jesus' body for burial. You see, the Jews weren't supposed to do just about anything on the Sabbath. You couldn't even cook. You had to prepare your meals the day before. And you certainly couldn't go and prepare someone for burial. So she waited over the Sabbath night, and early on Sunday morning she went to prepare his body with spices. Well, we do know one thing about Mary Magdalene. We know for sure that Jesus changed her life. There were also some women in the company who had been been healed from various evil afflictions and illnesses. Mary, the one called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, it says in Luke 8, chapter 2. This was a woman whose life had been radically changed. Now, we have to understand that in biblical times, they didn't have the medical knowledge that we have. And oftentimes, diseases were equated with demonic possession. She could have had several different afflictions. One of them might have been epilepsy. That was something that was often called demonic possession back in first century Israel. We don't know exactly what she was healed of, but we do know that she was healed and her life changed dramatically. We know that her life changed so much that with the death of Jesus, her life was tragically affected. You see, it was generally the responsibility of the family members to go and prepare the body of the deceased for burial. But Mary sought to care for Jesus. She was such a close friend that she considered herself family. Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone was moved away from the entrance. She was there to prepare him for burial, and now she sees that his body is gone. And she starts to look around, realizing that someone must have taken him. His body was missing and perhaps stolen, and she wept. You see, Mary didn't get the whole picture. She ran at once to get Peter and the other disciples, the one Jesus loved, breathlessly panting. They took the master from the tomb. We don't know where they've put him. Terrified and upset, she runs and gets Peter and John, and they run to the tomb, and they look inside, shocked. But then, Peter and John finally put it together. They looked at the evidence and believed. You see, they'd been following Jesus around for 3 years, and they had been paying attention to what he said. And when they saw the empty tomb with the shrouds just laying there, they realized he told us in 3 days he would arise. But poor Mary didn't get it right away. She needed a little prodding. Well, so why is this Mary Magdalene so important? Why would Pastor Keith waste the most important sermon of the year on some chick named Mary? Well, I think Mary has a lot of parallels with us. And I think it's important that we look at how she reacted and see how we might have reacted or how we might continue to react to Jesus. You see, Mary shows how lost we are without Jesus. Mary stood outside the tomb weeping. "They took my master," she said, "and I don't know where they've put him." She's so lost in her sorrow and disillusionment that she can't even see her Savior's face. You see, Jesus is standing right in front of her, and she didn't recognize her Savior. I don't know about you, but there have been lots of times when Jesus is right in front of me and I can't even see him. Jesus is working in certain areas of my life, and I'm so caught up in what's going on that I can't even see that he's there helping me. Maybe you're going through a difficult time in your life and God seems far away. Maybe you're just here because your spouse dragged you. Maybe you're just here because mom or dad made you come, or you realize that there's an expectation that you were supposed to come. And maybe you can't see that Jesus is standing right in front of you. Well, oftentimes when I'm in those situations, something will happen that makes me realize that Jesus is calling me, saying, "Keith, don't you realize I'm here?" And he says the same to Mary. "Mary." And then she recognizes him. If you're in one of those situations where you can't see that Jesus is standing right in front of you, I have a special message for you from God this morning. Jesus is calling your name. He's right there in front of you. He wants to help you through this difficult time. He wants to pull you out of your disillusionment and your fear and your sorrow and your worry. Boy, I think the worst thing that ever evolved in humanity is worry. Worry is the biggest waste of energy you could ever experience, because worrying doesn't do a dang bit of good, but you can sure spend a lot of time doing it. Jesus is calling your name, and he wants to help you. Well, then something interesting happens. Mary recognizes Jesus when he calls her name, and what's the first thing she has to do? When she recognizes him, she has to tell somebody. She has to tell somebody. She runs to tell the disciples, "I've seen him. He's alive." Mary's the first evangelist. The first evangelist is a woman. Now, I know that down through the centuries, the church has been not the best of places for women. But I want to tell you that the early church, that first century church, was the first time in the history of humanity that we know of where women were allowed to be in worship. A lot of folks will say, oh, that Apostle Paul, he's so mean because he tells women to be quiet in worship. Well, let me give you a little bit of history on that. For the first time, women were allowed to come and worship with their husbands. And I'm sure they were back there going, honey, what's he mean by that? What's he talking about? And what Paul was saying was, just be quiet and wait till you get home to ask the questions. Because you see, there were a lot of first century women preachers. Mary Magdalene was one of them. She spread the gospel and was the first one to do it. We want to make sure that women are intricate, how do you say that word? Intricately involved in the ministries of this church, because it is vital for the life of this church. Mary had to share it, because when someone changes your life, you got to tell people about it. You know, when you got engaged, you had to tell everybody. Show off the ring. Look at that. When you had your first grandchild, because I know I've seen all the pictures on your phones, you got to tell everybody about it. My life's been changed. I have a grandchild. Well, so what? That's a really nice story, Pastor Keith, about that Mary Magdalene, whatever her name is. It's really neat that she was the first evangelist and that she finally recognized Jesus. Well, the so what of this story is that Jesus asks us the same question he asked Mary. Why are you weeping? Why are you weeping, Mary? The Savior of the universe is standing right in front of you, and you don't even recognize me. Why are you weeping? Jesus asks you the same question. Why are you weeping? Now, you may not be actually weeping, but I know that there's a bunch of you out there that are consternated. You're facing difficulties in life, and it has you tied up in knots. You're facing tough times, whether they're emotional, financial, spiritual, relational, whatever they are, and you're tied up in knots. And Jesus is asking you, why are you tied up in knots? I'm here for you. I'm offering you peace and joy and salvation if you would but recognize me. You see, the problem is a lot of times we're not sure who we're looking for. We have a misconception about God. He's kind of a mixture of Santa Claus and a butler and a bodyguard. But Jesus is telling us that I'm everything you need if you will but see me for who I am. And then we'll finally hear him calling our name and know that he is our God. So why are you weeping this Easter? Has Santa Claus or the butler or the bodyguard let you down? Don't weep. Because Jesus, through his saving act on the cross and resurrection from the dead, which we celebrate this morning, is everything that you need if you will but allow him to be. So listen very carefully. He's calling you.